to go spread Islam to the Philippines?
Yes.
Or
Islam was spreading all throughout Southeast Asia. So he went to Tawi-Tawi with the intention of converting the people. And in Tawi-Tawi there's a place called Simunul. And he landed in Simunul and he built the first masjid. And it's still there today, the Masjid of Karim al-Makhtoum in Simunul. So Mindanao, Islam started to spread through here, the Sulu Peninsula and into the mainland of Mindanao. Almost all of Mindanao embraced Islam.
without fighting?
There's no fighting, nothing. This is just peaceful, like a missionary da'wah, people
through
going
trade as well, perhaps.
The majority of the people at the time, they were what we call animist. They didn't really have any religion. They used to worship many gods, polytheists. They'd worship the sun. They'd say Arau. They would worship the sun. They'd worship the tree. They'd probably worship fish. And Magellan, the Portuguese explorer, in the name of the King and Queen of Spain, came to try to conquer or at least establish a Christian foothold in the Philippines. However, the Muslim armies, the proud Muslim armies, led by Khalifa Lapu, the Tausug warrior, defeated him. And Magellan was killed, and the Spanish were defeated. Now, as we mentioned before, the Spanish weren't coming just as mere explorers. They were coming as crusaders. They're coming from Andalus. And they still had the outlook of seeing Muslims as enemies. And they continue having this outlook so much so that they would see the Muslims and they would call them Moro. Because we know Moro was the name that was given to the Muslims in Andalus. So the Muslims of the Philippines, the Spanish called them Moros. Until today, they're actually called Moros, the Muslims. And they call their land Bangsamoro, the land of the Moros, the homeland of the Muslims, or in other words, Bangsamoro. Remember this name, because this is the name of the homeland of the Muslims that have been fighting for 490 years. Every Muslim should know about this, inshallah. Now, it was said that the Christian king of Spain, Carlos, he actually sent an envoy to Lapu-Lapu, Khalifa Lapu, and he said, if you allow us to have the body of Magellan, then we'll give you treasures. Treasures like you could never imagine. Just give us the body of Magellan. What do you think was his response?
Maybe he gave him the head only?
He said, if you were to give me the treasures of the world, you can never have his body. Was it because he had some need for the body? No. But he had pride. He said, I'm not going to submit to some Christian king who sends this man to come kill us. I'm sorry, but this is not going to happen. So you see the situation of the Muslims then. They had pride. They were strong. They had an amazing leader, one of the true heroes of Islam, Khalifa Lapu rahimahullah. Now, if things stayed at that, it would be fine. Magellan has fought, he's been defeated. But of course, the Spanish now, as soon as they've been defeated, they're not going to give up. They want to get their revenge.
Sure, they send other.
So yes, what they did is they sent some Spanish forces 20 years later.
The dinner, about the feast, you said that
Other king?
that he poisoned the food.
Yes, they poisoned the food, and many of the Spanish died, but some of them escaped. Now after this, they escaped back to Spain.
In a one boat. Only.
In the boat, they went back to Spain, and they gave them the bad news. So the Spanish were devastated, but they didn't give up. 20 years later, in 1543, another Spanish explorer came. His name was Ruy López de Villalobos. Okay.
And the king Lapu-Lapu was still in the crown.
Whether or not it was King Carlos at that time, to be honest, I'm not too sure. This would be interesting to find out. Whether it was Carlos or not isn't too important. But we know they had the same agenda, which was revenge on the Muslims. So they sent Villalobos to go and attack these islands. So they came this time to the east of where Mactan Island was, to the islands of Leyte and Samar. So this is to the east of Mactan Island. And they came and they claimed them in the name of the King of Spain, who now, I'm looking at my notes and I realize was King Philip. He was King Philip II. So what Villalobos did is he actually named the islands on behalf of the king. King Philip, he said this, Las Islas Filipinas, the islands of King Philip. So this is where the name of the Philippines came from. And this stuck until today. The Muslims, they don't accept this. They say, the Philippines is your land. We belong to Bangsamoro. As we said, the Spanish were conquering most of the north and the central parts of the Philippines, but they were never able to fully penetrate the south. Now what had happened was Spain was actually at war with the UK, with England. And England had actually beaten the Spanish. So in turn, they gained all of the Spanish possessions, one of which was the Philippines. So from the year 1762 until 1764, only 2 years, the UK actually was in war with the Muslims of Mindanao.
The UK didn't come to Spanish aid. It didn't come to the
No,
Spanish
they were
aid.
fighting the Spanish.
Oh, they were fighting.
It's more so
Because
the
they-
battle of the imperialistic forces of the world at that time.
Yeah, and once the Spanish won, they got the Philippines. So they were then fighting against the Muslims. Now, the British didn't really fight the Muslims too much, but nonetheless, they were at war with the Muslims. And of course, they weren't able to defeat the Muslims. Now, what had happened was after 2 years, the Spanish got power back. Now, this continued. I mean, it just kept on going on and on up until 1896. 1896 was the year of the Philippine Revolution. You know, when the native people, who by that time were almost completely Christian, and you go to Philippines today, it was for a long time the only Christian country in all of Asia. Now the second one, as we know, is East Timor. So it's a very large Catholic country. They, abandoned their idol worship, and the majority of them became Catholic. They joined the Spanish. That's why a majority of them, you see, they've got Spanish names, a lot of Spanish culture, even though they're in Asia. Now, 1896 was the Philippine Revolution. Now, at this time, the Americans were at war with the Spanish. And so the Americans actually gained possession of the Philippines. So the Americans, they had a different strategy in fighting the Muslims. They had no mercy. What they would do is they would push through to the islands and they would build a base. The Spanish did this, but they never actually ventured out. Whereas the Americans would build a base, and they had no mercy for the Muslims. They would come in and they would fight against the Muslims. And it was said that when they fought against the Muslims, the guns that they had, even though they were big, powerful rifles, it wasn't enough against the Muslims, because they'd shoot a Muslim, and the Muslim would keep on charging at them. So the general of the army at that time, he wrote back and said, "Give us bigger guns. These models, they're not normal people. We shoot them and they just keep on coming." It's amazing. Now, there was a very famous battle that took place in, you've got the island of Sulu. Sulu is where the Tausugs are. And there was a volcano, a crater of a volcano. It's called Budaho. Now, what happened in Budaho is truly a tragedy. The Muslims who refused to submit to American rule actually went to the top of this mountain and were hiding, protecting themselves inside the crater of the volcano. Now, you had women, children, and men, of course. The Americans came up and they received an order from their general to kill every man, woman, and child. This is called the massacre of Budaho.
Like Ashab al-Ukhdud.
This was, yes, they were killed, and you see photos of it. We have photos of it. The Americans celebrated thousands of dead Muslims, unarmed, the majority of them, in this crater. The president of the USA, Woodrow Wilson, congratulated them on this massacre. And many Americans, like Mark Twain, he actually said this is not something to be proud of. And he wrote really much against this, against American imperialism. He said, is this what we're fighting for? To kill the natives, the innocents? So this was called the Budaho massacre. Now the Americans, they kept on going. They still kept on fighting the Muslims. And even though they were fighting them, they had a respect for them. You had, his name eludes me at the moment, he was called the General of the US Army. You've got the normal rank of general, then you've got a rank that only one person in American history has had, the General of the Muslim Army. Meaning he was the highest ranked American soldier in history. He said, these brave Muslim warriors, once they got onto the battlefield, it's like they're crazed. They think of nothing but death. They will not give up until they have given their life for their religion. He said, I've never seen anyone like them. Subhanallah. So the Americans continued fighting them until they withdrew. They could never fully conquer the Muslims. And they actually gave the Muslims the name, the unconquerable Mohammedans. Of course, Mohammedan meaning a Muslim.
For this 490 years, Muslims haven't been ever conquered.
Never conquered.
Until now.
Military conquered, they couldn't be conquered. Until now, they're still fighting. Until now, 490 years, the unconquerable Muslims of Mindanao. SubhanAllah, these are our brothers and sisters. And yes, sisters, up until now you will find that even when they're short on manpower, women will fight. I've met women who are with the Mujahideen in the Philippines. They would fight. They're more men than some of the men you would find. SubhanAllah. Now, once the Americans withdrew, now you had the Philippines fighting the Muslims, the Filipinos, the native, Filipinos fighting against the Moros. Now, what happened was the Filipino government came up with a plan to conquer Sabah in the name of the Philippines. Now, what had happened is they got 200 or 300 Muslims from, remember we said Tawi-Tawi? They took them from around Tawi-Tawi, and they took them to an island near Manila called Corregidor, and they trained them. They didn't tell them what their mission was. They trained them. And then once they were fully trained, they said to them, your mission is to invade Sabah in the name of the Philippines. Now, these are Muslims. They said, we're sorry, but we're not going to invade a Muslim land. We've got relatives there. And so the Filipino government realized the mistake they'd made. And they thought, well, we can't send them back to Tawi-Tawi. So they killed them all. They killed them all. But one, Qadar Allah, one of them survived. Subhanallah, it's amazing. Allah allowed one of them to survive. He escaped from the island. He swam to the shore. He went back to Mindanao and he told the people what had happened. 200 to 300 innocent Muslims killed in what was known as the Jabida massacre. How foolhardy and tactless was the Filipino government? You can imagine the fuss this caused. So this caused the Muslims of Mindanao to stand up and say, where are our rights? We're sick of being treated as second-class citizens. We are Muslims, we are Moros, and we are proud. And so what we call the Bangsamoro Jihad, it started again. You had a professor in the University of Manila. His name was Nur Miswari. He's a Muslim, a Tausug. And he began to unite the Muslims. All of them. He said, let us fight for our freedom. And he started the Bangsamoro Jihad. And alhamdulillah, the Muslims, they began to fight for their freedom. And the Filipinos, they couldn't match them. Because as we said, the Muslims, especially the Tausugs, they were brave, fierce warriors. So they said, look, have autonomy. Have autonomy. You can rule yourself, but you can't have independence. So the Muslims said, Tayyib, we'll take autonomy. Now by this point, things look optimistic.
لم يصل مراد إبراهيم رئيس الجبهة الإسلامية لتحرير مورو إلى القصر الرئاسي في العاصمة الفلبينية مانيلا إلا بعدما قطعت جبهته مسيرة تمتد لأكثر من 40 عاما من الصراع العسكري وقرابة 16 عاما من مفاوضات شاقة مع الحكومة الفلبينية برعاية ماليزية. في لقائهما الأول في مانيلا وقبيل توقيع الاتفاق الإطاري للسلام، تبادل إبراهيم والرئيس الفلبيني مع الهدايا التذكارية الأمال في مستقبل زاهر في جزيرة مينداناو في جنوبي الفلبين يتمتع فيه شعبها بغنى مواردها الطبيعية.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين.
بأدعية دينية إسلامية ومسيحية دشنت مراسم توقيع الاتفاق وجرى تقديم كشف بمراحل الصراع وتضحياته التي قادت إلى توقيع هذا الاتفاق الذي وصف بأنه خريطة طريق لإقرار سلام دائم في مينداناو.
نوقع أهم وثيقة في تاريخنا، وثيقة تعيد إلى أبناء شعبنا هوية أمتهم المسلمة وأرضهم وحقهم في حكم أنفسهم وتقرير مصيرهم.
ما زال أمامنا الكثير من العمل لجني ثمار هذا الاتفاق الإطاري. هناك التزامات يجب أن تنفذ، وشعب يحتاج لقيادة، وأحلام يجب أن تتحقق. إننا ملتزمون بتمكين شركائنا من التحول إلى حزب سياسي يمكنه المساعدة في قيادة مينداناو في الفترة الانتقالية إلى سلام حقيقي.
الاتفاق لا يعني نهاية للصراع كما أوضح رئيس الجبهة الإسلامية لتحرير مورو، لكنه يمهد لمفاوضات تنهي كل أسباب الصراع خلال السنوات الأربع المقبلة. وبمقتضى الاتفاق تتخلى الجبهة الإسلامية لتحرير مورو عن طموحها إلى الاستقلال عن الفلبين وتنزع سلاح مقاتليها تدريجيا في مقابل إقامة كيان سياسي جديد للمسلمين في مينداناو يتمتع بالحكم الذاتي في إطار الفلبين. وتبقى التفاصيل من قبيل الجدول الزمني لنزع سلاح مقاتلي مورو وترتيبات تقاسم السلطة بين الحكومتين المركزية والإقليمية ومساحة أراضي الإقليم الجديد وتعديل الدستور الفلبيني ليوائم ترتيبات السلام، تبقى عقبات في طريق إقرار اتفاق نهائي